The late afternoon sun hung low over the dusty town square, spilling golden light over the cobblestones and the chatter of everyday life. Vendors called out prices for roasted corn and sweet mangoes. The smell of grilled fish drifted through the air, and tricycle engines hummed in the background. Amid the noise and color of it all stood a man most people barely noticed. A wary, weathered figure with deep lines on his face and eyes that seemed to hold too many stories. His name was Rico Mendoza, though few bothered to ask. To the regulars in the plaza, he was simply that old guy with the broken guitar. His faded denim jacket was too big for his frame, his shoes had holes at the toes, and his guitar, a sun-faded acoustic with one missing string, was held together by tape and faith. That day, like every other, Rico stood near the fountain, tuning his guitar as best he could. A couple of children stopped to watch, giggling as one whispered, "He thinks he's famous." Rico smiled weakly. "Not famous, just hopeful," he murmured, plucking at the remaining strings. He cleared his throat and called out to a passing group of teenagers. "Hey, kids, want to hear some Elvis?" They exchanged looks, then laughed. "Elvis? You mean Elvis Presley? Come on, man, that's ancient." One boy scoffed, but Rico only grinned. "Good music never gets old, son, just needs someone to remember it." The teens rolled their eyes and kept walking. One of them, a girl with a pink backpack, tossed a coin into his open guitar case, not as payment but as pity. It clinked against the metal bottom, the only coin of the day. Rico picked it up, turned it in his palm, and whispered, "Thank you." Then, he looked up at the sky. "Maybe tomorrow's the day, Papa." For a long moment, he just stood there, gazing at the clouds drifting lazily over the town. The world had changed so much since he last sang on a real stage. There was a time, back in his 20s, when his voice could fill a room, when people actually listened. But after his father's death, everything seemed to fade: the music, the laughter, the purpose. He had promised his father he'd keep the fire alive, that he'd sing like Elvis, not to imitate the man, but to carry his spirit, to make people feel something real. But when his father was gone, that fire dimmed into ashes. Now decades later, here he was, singing for strangers who didn't believe. Rico strummed a chord, out of tune but full of heart, and started softly singing to himself, "Love me tender, love me true." The melody drifted into the air, barely audible over the marketplace noise. A few people turned their heads for a second, only to move on. Someone shouted from a stall, "Hey, keep it down, old man! You're scaring away customers." Rico lowered his voice, embarrassed. A group of young men sitting by a fruit stand started to laugh. "He says he sounds like Elvis. What a joke." "Yeah." Another chimed in. If Elvis was choking on peanuts. The laughter spread, cruel, sharp and loud. Rico forced a smile, trying to shrug it off, but inside something twisted painfully. He wasn't angry at them. He was used to disbelief. But every insult was like a reminder that he had once dreamed bigger, and failed. He stepped back toward the fountain and sat down on its edge. His reflection in the rippling water looked tired, smaller than he remembered. He thought of his father again. A man with strong hands and a gentle soul, who had built furniture for a living and music for the heart. Rico could still hear his voice. "Mijo, don't let the world tell you who you are. You sing because you have something to give." He sighed and whispered, "I'm trying, Papa. I'm still trying." Just then, a small voice interrupted his thoughts. "Sir." Rico looked up to see a little boy, maybe 7 years old, standing in front of him, holding a tiny cup of lemonade. The boy had kind eyes and wore a school uniform. "You can have this," he said. "You look thirsty." Rico blinked, surprised. "For me." The boy nodded. "My mama says we should share with people who work hard. You're working, right?" Rico chuckled softly, his voice cracking. "I guess I am." He took the lemonade carefully, as if it were something fragile. "Thank you, little man." The boy smiled and ran back toward a cafe across the street, where a woman, his mother, watched quietly from the doorway. She gave Rico a small nod. It was such a simple gesture, but it stirred something deep in him. Maybe not everyone had stopped believing. Maybe kindness still had a home in this town. Rico stood again, repositioning his guitar strap. The golden light had softened now, the air cooler. People were finishing their shopping, some sitting near the fountain. He took a deep breath. "All right," he said softly to himself. "One more time." He strummed the opening chords of "Can't Help Falling in Love." The sound was rough, imperfect, but the emotion was pure. He closed his eyes, letting the words carry him back to that small living room years ago, when he and his father would sing together after dinner. He could almost hear his father harmonizing beside him, but before he could finish the first verse, a vendor yelled, "Hey Rico! Don't start again, please. People come here to relax, not to listen to old music." The moment shattered. Rico lowered his guitar, nodded politely, and murmured, "Sorry." As he turned to pack his things, the laughter started again, not loud this time, but low, like whispers behind his back. "Poor guy really thinks he's the king. Maybe he's just crazy." He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply looked at his guitar, the last piece of his father he still owned, and smiled sadly. "They don't have to believe," he whispered. Music believes in me. And though he didn't know it yet, someone else had been listening, someone who would soon change everything. The cafe owner, the same woman whose son had offered him lemonade, was watching from the doorway, her eyes following him as he walked away, his guitar slung across his back, the last rays of sunlight catching on the scuffed wood. There was something about that man, something she couldn't quite explain. And soon, the whole town would know it too. The next afternoon, the same town square buzzed with its usual rhythm. The sound of sizzling oil, tricycle horns, laughter, and the shuffle of sandals on cobblestones. Life went on, as if nothing remarkable ever happened here. But for Rico Mendoza, today felt different. He stood by the fountain again, the same cracked guitar hanging from his shoulder. The sky was overcast, the light dim, but his heart beat with quiet determination. The lemonade from the little boy yesterday had reminded him that even the smallest act of kindness could lift a man's spirit. And maybe, just maybe, today would be the day someone truly listened. He brushed the dust off his jeans, checked his guitar strings, and took a deep breath. "All right, Rico," he whispered. "Sing like it's the last time. For Papa." He began to strum. The melody of "Love Me Tender" filled the air, faint at first, then stronger, richer. His voice cracked but carried emotion that cut through the noise of the market. A few heads turned, some stopped to watch, but not everyone stopped to appreciate. A group of young street performers, 5 teens with shiny guitars and Bluetooth speakers, were setting up their own equipment nearby. They had been performing pop covers in the square for weeks, drawing big crowds and tips from tourists. They noticed Rico's old guitar and weathered face, and smirked. "Hey, old man," the tallest one called out. "You trying to compete with us now?" Rico paused, looking up. "No son, I'm just sharing a little music." The boy crossed his arms. "Music? That's noise, man. People don't want to hear that old stuff. This is 2025, not 1955. The others laughed. One pulled out his phone and started recording. "Let's see the legend in action, huh? The Filipino Elvis. Maybe we'll post it, could go viral." Rico felt a sting in his chest. He wanted to walk away to avoid another humiliation, but something held him there. Perhaps the memory of his father's words, "Sing for hearts, not applause." He smiled softly. "All right," he said, strumming a few chords. "How about a friendly challenge?" The teens' laughter grew louder. "A challenge? Against us?" Rico nodded. "Yes, I'll sing one song, just one. If you don't like it, I'll leave and never sing here again." The leader smirked. "And if we do like it?" Rico shrugged. "Then maybe you'll believe." The crowd, sensing something interesting, began to gather. Vendors leaned out of their stalls, customers paused mid-conversation, and the air thickened with curiosity. Even the cafe owner, Lisa, stepped out from behind the counter to see what the commotion was about. Her little boy Benji tugged at her hand excitedly. "Mom, that's the man I gave lemonade to." Liza shushed him gently, but her eyes stayed fixed on Rico. Rico adjusted the strap on his guitar. His palms were sweating and his heart pounded in his chest. It had been so long since anyone truly listened to him sing. The leader of the teens grinned and motioned dramatically to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, the king of the plaza will now perform. Let's give him a hand." The applause that followed wasn't sincere, it was mocking, full of snickers and smirks. Rico strummed once. The sound was trembled. He started singing, "Can't Help Falling in Love." But his voice cracked midway through the first line. The laughter came fast. "Ha! Sounds like my grandpa trying to sing in the shower." One of the teens yelled, "Sam Elvis! Give us the hips too!" Another shouted, swaying mockingly. The crowd chuckled. Rico froze. His throat tightened. The humiliation burned. For a moment, he considered putting down the guitar and walking away forever. But then, from the edge of the crowd, a small voice called out, steady and kind, "Please, let him sing again." All heads turned. It was Benji, standing beside his mother, his little fists clenched. "He didn't get a fair chance," he said. He was nervous. The laughter stopped for a beat. Lisa gently touched her son's shoulder. "Benji, honey." But the boy stood firm. "Mom, please." Rico looked at the child, then at the crowd, then at his guitar. For a moment everything went silent. He took another deep breath. "May I?" he asked softly. The leader of the teen group shrugged. "Fine, one more shot. But if you mess up again." Wirenko nodded. "Fair enough." He closed his eyes. The sounds of the plaza faded. The chatter, the laughter, even the distant motorbikes. And all he could hear was the faint echo of his father's voice. "Music doesn't come from the throat, son. It comes from the soul." He adjusted his grip, steadied his breath, and began again. The first chord rang out, deeper this time, fuller. His fingers moved with purpose, and when he opened his mouth, the voice that came out was unrecognizable. "Wise men say only fools rush in." The crowd stilled. His tone was warm, velvet smooth, with that unmistakable tremor of longing, the Elvis sound, the kind of voice that carried weight, nostalgia, and something raw that reached inside you. People who had been laughing moments ago now stared wide-eyed. Vendors leaned closer. The young performers exchanged glances. disbelief washing over their faces. Rico continued, "But I can't help falling in love with you." Every note hit perfectly. The pain, the love, the years of silence, it was all there. Even the air seemed to thicken around him. The same crowd that had mocked him minutes before now stood frozen, as though afraid to breathe and break the spell. As the song went on, Rico's posture changed, his voice grew stronger, his confidence returning. The years melted away. For those few minutes, he wasn't a forgotten man, he was the young dreamer again, standing beside his father, singing their favorite song. When the final line left his lips, he held the last note with trembling passion, pure, powerful, and full of heart. Silence followed, not laughter, not noise, just silence. Then, softly at first, came the sound of clapping. It was Benji, small hands clapping proudly, then his mother joined in, then a few vendors, and suddenly the entire plaza erupted in applause. The teens looked around shocked, the leader lowered his head, his smirk gone. Rico, still holding his guitar, blinked in disbelief. Tears shimmered in his eyes. For the first time in years, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't a joke. Lisa stepped forward through the crowd, wiping her eyes. "Sir," she said softly, "that was beautiful." Rico nodded humbly. "Thank you, ma'am, that song was for my father." Benji smiled up at him. "I knew you could do it." The young performers said nothing. The leader, guilt written across his face, finally muttered, "Yo, you really sounded like him." Rico smiled, not with pride but peace. "I wasn't trying to sound like Elvis," he said gently. "I was just trying to sing like me." And though no one knew it yet, that small moment, that single act of courage, kindness, and redemption, would ripple far beyond the town square. Because what started as a challenge would soon become a miracle that touched hearts around the world. The plaza had fallen into an almost reverent silence after Rico's short performance. The kind of silence that only happens when people have witnessed something that cuts deep. The echoes of his last note seemed to linger in the air, hanging above the cobblestones and fruit stalls, as though the town itself was holding its breath. Rico stood motionless for a moment, still clutching his guitar, unsure whether to smile or cry. The applause that had started small, from little Benji's hands, now swelled like a wave. People were clapping, cheering, even whistling. A few had tears glistening in their eyes. Lisa, the cafe owner, stepped forward and placed a hand over her heart. "That was unbelievable," she said softly. "I felt that." Rico nodded, his throat tightening. "Thank you, ma'am. I just wanted to remember what it felt like to sing again." The leader of the young street performers, the same one who had mocked him, stood frozen, his guitar hanging loosely at his side. For the first time that afternoon, he had nothing clever to say. I didn't know you could sing like that," he muttered, almost to himself. Rico smiled faintly. "I didn't either. Not anymore." He sat on the edge of the fountain, his heart still racing, his fingers trembling slightly from adrenaline and disbelief. All around him, people gathered, strangers who moments ago wouldn't have given him a second glance. Some took out their phones to record him, others just stood quietly, smiling. "Do another one?" someone shouted.
"Yes, please."
Another added. "Sing another Elvis song." Rico hesitated. It had been years since he'd sung 2 songs in a row. His voice wasn't what it used to be, and his old guitar wasn't exactly stage ready. But the look in their eyes, expectant, warm, genuine, stirred something inside him. He adjusted the strap, closed his eyes, and began strumming again. This time he chose something livelier, Suspicious Minds. The rhythm was imperfect, but his energy was alive. "We're caught in a trap, I can't walk out." The crowd clapped to the beat. A little girl began to dance near the fountain. The same teenagers who had mocked him earlier now stood watching, some with sheepish grins, some tapping their feet. Even they couldn't resist the infectious spirit of the song. For a few magical minutes, the entire plaza was transformed. Vendors forgot about their sales, people leaned out of shop windows, tricycle drivers parked along the curb just to listen. The music didn't just fill the air, it filled hearts. When Rico hit the chorus, his voice soared. It wasn't just a song anymore, it was redemption. Every note carried the years he had lost, every line a confession of pain and perseverance. Lisa wiped at her eyes. She had heard good singers before, her cafe often hosted live performers, but this was different. This man wasn't just performing, he was living the song. When the final line ended, "Because I love you too much, baby," the crowd erupted. People cheered, clapped, shouted his name.
"Encore!"
Encore. "Elvis is alive in the Philippines," someone yelled jokingly, and everyone laughed, not mockingly this time but with pure joy. Rico laughed too, a deep, hearty sound that startled even him. It had been years since he had laughed like that. He bowed slightly. Thank you very much," he said, mimicking Elvis's famous drawl, and the crowd roared with laughter and applause. The teenagers approached him, their earlier arrogance replaced with respect. The leader extended his hand. "Sir, I'm sorry for being rude earlier. You showed us what real music feels like." Rico shook his hand firmly. "That's all right, son. I was young once too." The boy smiled. "Would you maybe teach us sometime? You know, how to sing like that. Rico chuckled. I don't know if I can teach you to sound like Elvis. But I can teach you to feel what you're singing. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but the warmth lingered. A few tourists approached to drop bills into his guitar case, not out of pity this time, but gratitude. Someone even placed a bouquet of bought flowers beside him. Lisa stayed behind with Benji, who was still beaming from ear to ear. Sir, she said softly, would you come inside for some food? You must be hungry after all that singing. Rico hesitated. No ma'am, I can't afford. She cut him off with a gentle smile. I didn't ask you to buy anything. I'm inviting you as a guest. Benji tugged at his sleeve. Please sir! Mom makes the best pancit. Rico's heart melted. Well, he said with a grin, how can I say no to that? Inside the small cafe, the smell of coffee and garlic rice filled the air. The walls were lined with old photos and hand-painted murals of music notes. Lisa led Rico to a corner table while Benji ran off to fetch plates. You really have a gift, Lisa said. You made the whole street stop. Rico smiled, staring down at his guitar. It's funny, isn't it? Nobody believed me for years. I stopped believing in myself too. But your boy, he reminded me that music isn't about who listens. It's about who feels it. Lisa's expression softened. You know, we have live music every Friday night. Maybe you could perform here. Officially, you wouldn't have to play outside anymore. Rico blinked. You mean work here, sing here? She nodded. Yes, I'll pay you fairly. You bring the heart, I'll bring the audience. He sat in stunned silence for a moment. His hands shook slightly as he set the guitar down. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Benji said, placing a steaming bowl of noodles in front of him. Then you can sing every day. Rico laughed, his eyes moist. Yes, he whispered. Yes, I'd love that. As he ate, he noticed people still looking through the cafe windows. The same people who had mocked him earlier, now smiling, waving, giving thumbs up. It felt unreal. When he finally stepped out that evening, the sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and pink. The fountain sparkled under the fading light, and the air was soft, almost sacred. He stood there for a moment, watching the last of the crowd disappear, and whispered to himself, we did it, Papa. They heard us. A tear rolled down his cheek, not of sadness but of peace. That night, he slept behind the cafe under a small awning, his old guitar tucked safely beside him. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man without a home. He felt like a man with a purpose again. And little did he know, this was just the beginning. The next evening, when he sang again, under the warm lights of the cafe and before a crowd that had doubled overnight, something extraordinary would happen. A moment so powerful, it would touch hearts across the world and make everyone believe again. The following evening, the cafe glowed with life. Strings of warm fairy lights hung across the doorway, and laughter spilled into the street like music itself. The hand-painted sign above the entrance read Liz's Corner Cafe, but tonight, it might as well have been renamed the House of Hope, because for the first time, everyone had gathered for something special. Inside, every chair was taken. Locals squeezed in shoulder to shoulder, vendors from the market sat beside students, tricycle drivers leaned against the wall, all waiting for one man. The same man who just days ago they had mocked and ignored. Rico Mendoza stood in the small corner of the cafe that served as a stage, tuning his battered guitar. The lights glinted off its cracked surface, and the strings hummed softly beneath his calloused fingertips. But Rico wasn't nervous anymore. His heart, for the first time in years, was steady. Benji sat cross-legged at the front, his chin resting on his hands, eyes shining with excitement. Behind him Lisa wiped down the counter, sneaking glances at Rico every few seconds, proud and emotional all at once. As the chatter died down, she stepped forward with a smile. Good evening, everyone. She began, her voice carrying over the room. Tonight, we're not just serving coffee and meals. Tonight, we're serving something much more special, music from the heart. Please welcome our very own Rico. Applause thundered through the cafe, mixed with whistles and cheers. Rico bowed his head humbly, his lips curving into a small grateful smile. He took a deep breath and began to strum. The familiar notes of Can't Help Falling in Love drifted through the air, the same song that had changed everything in the plaza. But this time, it wasn't just a performance. It was a thank you. Wise men say only fools rush in. The room grew still. Even the clinking of cups stopped. His voice was rich and soulful, carrying warmth that seemed to melt the walls themselves. Each lyric flowed like a confession, raw and beautiful. As he sang, tears welled in Liz's eyes. She leaned against the counter, remembering how he had stood outside in the dust just 2 days ago, ridiculed, alone, unseen. And now here he was, owning the night with a grace and strength that silenced an entire room. Rico's gaze wandered across the crowd, and he saw the same young men from before, the ones who had mocked him. They stood near the doorway, heads bowed slightly, clapping along respectfully. It wasn't shame that filled their faces now, but admiration. When the song ended, the cafe erupted in applause again, louder this time, genuine and full of emotion. Rico smiled, took a sip of water, and then said quietly into the microphone, "Thank you everyone. You don't know what this means to me." He paused, looking down at his guitar. "I've carried this old thing for a long time. It's the only piece I have left of my father. He taught me everything I know about music. He used to tell me, son, sing even when no one listens. The right ears will hear you when it's time." The room went silent. Rico's voice trembled slightly, but he continued. "After he passed away, I stopped singing. I thought maybe the world didn't need my music anymore. But yesterday a little boy reminded me that every song still matters. Especially when it comes from the heart." He smiled gently at Benji, whose face lit up like sunshine. The crowd clapped again, softer this time, touched by the sincerity of his words. Rico lifted his guitar once more. "This next song is for my father, and for anyone who's ever lost someone they loved but still feels them, right here." He placed a hand over his chest. The first soft chords of "Love Me Tender" filled the air, and immediately, something shifted in the room. People leaned closer. Some began to cry quietly, the melody tugging at memories they'd buried, of fathers, mothers, lovers, friends. "Love me tender, love me true, all my dreams fulfilled." Rico's eyes glistened as he sang, but he didn't look sad, he looked free. Every note was a goodbye and a hello all at once. He was singing not just to remember, but to release. Halfway through the song something unexpected happened. A man from the crowd, elderly, wearing a brown cap and a faded Elvis t-shirt, stood up, holding a small portable speaker. He pressed play. Suddenly, the cafe filled with a soft instrumental track, an old Elvis backing recording. Rico smiled in surprise, then adjusted his rhythm to match. And in that moment, it was as though time folded. The music of the king and the voice of a forgotten man merged into one, echoing through the night like a prayer. When the final note ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the cafe. Even the air seemed heavy with emotion. Then came the silence, that sacred, unforgettable silence that always follows something profound. Lisa was the first to move. She stepped forward, tears streaming down her cheeks, and said softly, "Rico, you've given us something we didn't even know we needed." The crowd applauded once more, many rising to their feet. The teenagers approached again with a simple gift, a brand new guitar case. "We chipped in," their leader said shyly. "Your guitar deserves better." Rico was speechless. He ran his hand over the case, then looked up at them, his eyes wet. "Thank you," he whispered. "You don't know how much this means to me." Lisa walked over, holding a small envelope. "And this," she said, pressing it into his hand, "is your first week's pay. You're officially part of our family now." Rico stared at it, overwhelmed. I don't deserve this." "Yes, you do," she replied, "because this cafe isn't about food or business anymore. It's about heart, and you brought that back to us." The crowd erupted into cheers again. Rico bowed deeply, overcome by gratitude. As the night wound down, people stayed behind to talk to him, shake his hand, and thank him for reminding them what real music felt like. Someone even streamed his performance live, and within hours clips of the Filipino Elvis began spreading across social media, people sharing, commenting, crying. But Rico didn't know that yet. When the last guest left and the cafe lights dimmed, he sat alone for a moment, strumming softly, humming to himself. The fairy lights twinkled above him, reflecting in his eyes. He looked up, smiling faintly at the ceiling. "We did it, Papa. They finally heard us." Outside, the wind carried the last echo of his song through the quiet street. It floated over the plaza, past the fountain, past the market, like a promise kept after many years. And for the first time since his father's passing, Rico felt whole again. The following weeks transformed the once empty corner cafe into something magical. The faded sign above the door now glowed at night, "The Heart of Elvis." Fairy lights wrapped around the windows, and every evening, the aroma of brewed coffee mixed with the hum of anticipation as people gathered to hear the man whose voice had stopped an entire street. Rico stood inside the cafe, tuning his guitar with practiced care. His hands were still calloused, but steadier now, hands that once trembled from hunger and fear. On one wall hung a framed black and white picture of Elvis Presley, and right beside it a new photo, Rico smiling shyly, guitar in hand, surrounded by the cafe owner, her son, and a crowd of joyful faces. The caption read, "Where hearts are healed by music." He never imagined this would happen. Not after years of sleeping under bridges and singing to himself just to keep loneliness from crushing him. But here he was, standing in a place that had become more than a cafe. It was home. The little boy Ben, the cafe owner's son, ran up to him holding a worn-out toy microphone. "Mr. Rico, are you gonna sing Can't Help Falling in Love again tonight?" he asked eagerly. Rico chuckled, brushing back the boy's hair. "I might, kiddo. But tonight, I'm thinking of trying something new. Something my father used to sing when he'd fix the radio back in our old house." Ben grinned. "Then I'll be right in front."
You better be.
Rico said with a wink. "You're my lucky charm." Outside, people began to line up, families, teenagers, and even a few elderly couples holding hands. Some of them had seen that first miraculous performance weeks ago. Others came because they'd heard whispers about the homeless man with the golden Elvis voice who made strangers cry in the street. As the cafe filled, Rico stepped backstage, though backstage was really just a small area near the counter where he kept his case and jacket. He looked at himself in the small mirror hanging on the wall. His reflection was different now, the eyes no longer hollow, the cheeks fuller, the lines on his face softened by gratitude. He gently touched the pendant hanging from his neck, a rusted piece of his father's old guitar pick, strung on a thin leather cord. "For you, Dad," he whispered. "I hope you're hearing this." Dimmed. The soft chatter quieted. The cafe owner, Marissa, stepped forward and tapped the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said warmly, "thank you for joining us again at the heart of Elvis. Tonight, we have our very own Rico, the man who reminded us all what it means to believe again." Applause rippled through the room as Rico walked out, his head bowed humbly. He sat on the stool, the spotlight gently warming his face. For a moment he just looked around, the smiling faces, the glow of candles on tables, the reflection of lights on the window. It was all so different from the street corners where people once ignored him. He adjusted the mic and said softly, "I used to think life only gives you one chance. That if you lose it, that's it. But sometimes life gives you another one. And it starts with a single person believing in you." He looked at Marissa and Ben, smiling. "This song's for them. And for anyone who's ever been told they weren't enough." He began to play. The guitar's first chords drifted through the cafe like a gentle breeze. His voice, deep and honeyed, filled every corner, soft, soulful and full of truth. "Love me tender, love me true, all my dreams fulfilled." Every note carried pieces of his story. The hunger, the nights in the rain, the memory of his father singing off key just to make him laugh. The people listened in reverent silence. Some swayed gently, others closed their eyes, letting the melody wash over them. When he reached the final verse, he paused for a heartbeat, voice trembling with emotion. "For my darling, I love you and I always will." As the last word left his lips, people stood clapping and cheering. Some shouted, "Encore," while others simply wiped away tears. Rico bowed his head, overwhelmed. For the first time in his life, those tears weren't from pain, they were from gratitude. Marissa approached with glistening eyes. "You did it again, Rico," she said softly. "You gave everyone here something they didn't even know they needed." Rico smiled. "Music's funny that way. It's not about being perfect, it's about being real." After the show, a man in a suit approached Rico. "Excuse me," he said, offering his hand. "I'm Daniel Cruz, talent scout for a small record label in Manila. I saw you online, someone posted your first street performance. I have to say I've never heard anything like it." Rico froze. "Yo, you saw that?" Daniel nodded. "It went viral, millions of views. People all over the world are talking about you, the man who sang Elvis from the heart." Rico blinked, hardly believing his ears. I don't even have a phone," he said with a laugh. Daniel smiled. "Well, you have something better, a gift. We'd like to record your story, your songs, and maybe even get you on stage in front of a bigger crowd." Marissa gasped, covering her mouth. Ben cheered, "Mr. Rico, you're gonna be famous." But Rico just looked around the cafe, the place that saved him, the faces that believed when nobody else did. Then he looked back at Daniel. "I'll think about it," he said quietly. "But right now, I'm exactly where I need to be." Later that night, after everyone left and the lights dimmed, Rico sat alone by the window, strumming softly. Outside the moon hung low, casting silver light across the street where his journey had begun. He closed his eyes and whispered, "We did it, Dad, you and me." For a moment, he swore he could almost hear a familiar chuckle, his father's voice saying, "That's my boy." A tear slid down his cheek, but it was a tear of peace. In the quiet glow of the cafe, Rico strummed one last chord, smiling to himself. Life had come full circle. From the streets to the stage, from loneliness to belonging. And all because one small boy asked his mother to let a broken man sing again. Final message in a world quick to judge by appearances. Rico's story reminds us that every person has a song waiting to be heard. Sometimes, the most beautiful voices come from those who've been silenced the longest. And all it takes is one act of kindness to let them be heard. Because when you believe in someone, you don't just change their life. You might just change the world.